I woke up to 3 feet of snow and a middle-aged woman screaming at my front door at 6 in the morning. Through the frosted glass, I could see her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled despite the blizzard that was still dumping snow across northern Michigan. And I knew immediately this was going to be a problem. I opened the door to find Brenda Patterson, the president of the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association, standing on my porch with her arms crossed and a look of absolute fury on her face. "Ethan Reeves, do you have any idea what you've done?" she shrieked before I could even say good morning. "The sidewalk is completely impassable. You were supposed to have it cleared by 5 this morning according to Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA bylaws." I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and stared at her. "Brenda, it's still snowing. Even if I cleared it an hour ago, it would be covered again. And what sidewalk are you talking about? The community sidewalk that runs along your property line." She thrust a finger toward the eastern edge of my lot, where indeed a pathway cut through the snow. "Every homeowner is responsible for maintaining the section adjacent to their property during inclement weather. The fine for non-compliance is $500 per day." I stepped out onto the porch, letting the cold air wake me up fully. "Brenda, that's not the HOA sidewalk. That's my driveway extension. It's on my property and it's private." Her face went red. "Excuse me. That has been designated as community property since this development was established in 2018. I have the plat maps to prove it." "Then you have the wrong plat maps," I said calmly. "I had a survey done when I bought this place last year. That entire section is within my property boundaries. I own it, and it's not accessible to the public." Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "That's impossible. We've been maintaining that path for years. It connects the north and south sections of the neighborhood. On my property," I repeated, "without my permission, which, by the way, makes everyone who uses it a trespasser." The color drained from her face, then returned with a vengeance. "You can't be serious. There are 40 families who use that path daily to access the main road without having to walk all the way around on Oakwood Drive. Are you telling me you're going to block it off? I'm telling you it's mine, and I never gave anyone permission to use it. If you want to continue using it, we can discuss an easement agreement, but you don't get to demand that I maintain it and threaten me with fines." Brenda pulled out her phone and started jabbing at the screen. "We'll see about this. I'm calling an emergency HOA board meeting. You'll be hearing from our lawyer by the end of the day." She stomped off through the snow, her designer boots sinking with each step, leaving me standing on my porch wondering how this was going to escalate. I had moved to Traverse City last February, buying this beautiful 3-acre property on the outskirts of the Lakeside Meadows development because I wanted space and privacy. The house had been a steal because the previous owner, an elderly man named George Whitmore, had let it fall into disrepair. I had spent the last 11 months renovating it, and I thought I had finally found peace. I should have known better. After making coffee, I dug through my filing cabinet and pulled out the survey I had commissioned from Northland Property Services. The document was clear as day. The path that Brenda was calling a community sidewalk cut through my property about 15 feet from the eastern boundary line. According to my deed and survey, I owned everything up to the actual property line, which was marked by a row of mature pine trees that the HOA had apparently been ignoring for years. I called my real estate attorney, Marcus Chen, and explained the situation. He listened patiently while I described Brenda's early morning visit and her threats. "You have the survey handy?" Marcus asked, looking at it right now. "Email it to me. Also send me a copy of your deed and any HOA documents you received when you purchased the property." If what you're telling me is accurate, the HOA has been using your land without permission, which means they have no legal right to demand maintenance or assess fines. That's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something. The only way they could have a legitimate claim is if there's a recorded easement that predates your purchase, but that would have shown up in the title search. Send me everything, and I'll review it today. In the meantime, don't agree to anything and document every interaction you have with the HOA. I spent the next hour scanning documents and sending them to Marcus. The blizzard continued to rage outside, and the snow was now nearly 4 feet deep. The path that crossed my property was completely buried, and I could see several people trudging through the deeper snow around the edges of my land, shooting angry looks at my house as they passed. By noon, my phone started ringing. The first call was from Brenda again. "Ethan, I've reviewed the subdivision plat maps, and you are absolutely wrong about the property boundaries. That sidewalk is clearly marked as a community amenity. You need to get out there and clear it immediately, or the fine will increase to $1,000 per day starting tomorrow." "Brenda, I've sent all my documentation to my attorney. Until this is resolved, I'm not clearing anything that's on my property, and I'm not paying any fines. If you want to continue this conversation, you can contact Marcus Chen at Traverse Legal Group." "Your attorney?" She sounded genuinely shocked. "You're lawyering up over a sidewalk. This is exactly the kind of hostile behavior that ruins communities. I hope you realize that you're making enemies of everyone in this neighborhood." "I'm protecting my property rights. There's nothing hostile about that." She hung up on me. The second call came from Todd Patterson, Brenda's husband and the HOA treasurer. His tone was more conciliatory but no less insistent. "Hey, Ethan, listen. I know Brenda can come on a little strong, but she's just trying to keep the neighborhood running smoothly. This path has been used by residents for years. Can't we work something out? Maybe we can compensate you for the maintenance costs." "Todd, I appreciate the calmer approach, but the issue isn't maintenance costs. The issue is that the HOA has been treating my private property as a community asset without my permission. That needs to stop. Come on, man. Be reasonable. There are families with kids who use that path to get to school. You're going to make them walk an extra quarter mile in this weather." "I'm not making anyone do anything. The HOA made the decision to route a path through someone else's property. That's not my problem to solve." He sighed heavily. "You know what? Fine. Be that guy, but don't expect anyone around here to help you when you need something." The third call was from a woman named Patricia Hendricks, who introduced herself as a member of the HOA board and the neighborhood's community relations coordinator, whatever that meant. "Mr. Reeves, I want to start by saying that I understand you're new to the neighborhood and may not fully appreciate how things work here at Lakeside Meadows. We're a tight-knit community that values cooperation and mutual support. The path you're claiming ownership of has been maintained by volunteers and has served as a vital connection between our two residential sections. Blocking it off would cause significant hardship for many families. Mrs. Hendricks, I'm not blocking anything off. I'm simply pointing out that it's my property, and the HOA doesn't have the right to demand that I maintain it or assess fines against me for not doing so. But surely, you can see that being part of a community means making small sacrifices for the greater good. It's not a small sacrifice when the HOA is threatening me with $1,000 daily fines for not shoveling my own property according to their schedule. If the board wants to discuss a formal easement agreement that includes proper compensation and liability protection, I'm willing to have that conversation. But I'm not going to be bullied into complying with demands that have no legal basis." Patricia's voice turned cold. "I see. Well, Mr. Reeves, I hope you understand that your lack of community spirit will be noted. We have ways of making life difficult for residents who refuse to cooperate. Is that a threat? It's a statement of fact. Good day. I sat in my kitchen, staring at my phone and wondering what I had gotten myself into. I had bought this property specifically to avoid this kind of neighborhood drama. My previous home had been in a subdivision in Grand Rapids where the HOA had been relatively hands-off, and I had never had any issues. But Lakeside Meadows was apparently a different beast entirely. Marcus called back around 3 in the afternoon. Okay, I've reviewed everything you sent me, and the situation is even better for you than I thought. Not only do you own the land that the path crosses, but there's no recorded easement of any kind. The HOA has been using your property without any legal right to do so for at least 6 years, possibly longer. So what do we do? First, I'm going to send a cease and desist letter to the HOA board, informing them that they are trespassing on your property and that they have no authority to assess fines or demand maintenance. Second, I'm going to request that they provide documentation of any claimed easement or property right. And third, I'm going to make it clear that any further harassment will result in legal action. You think it'll actually stop them? Marcus laughed. Probably not immediately. These HOA types tend to think they're above the law, but once they consult with their own attorney and realize they're in the wrong, they'll back down. The key is to document everything and not engage with them directly. Let me handle all communication from this point forward. Sounds good. Send me your retainer agreement. After hanging up with Marcus, I made myself lunch and watched the snow continue to fall. The blizzard was expected to last another 24 hours, and the accumulation was already breaking records for March in northern Michigan. The path through my property was now completely indistinguishable from the surrounding yard, buried under several feet of pristine white powder. Around 5 that evening, I heard voices outside. Looking out my front window, I saw a group of about 8 people gathered at the edge of my property, pointing and gesturing. Brenda was at the center of the group, clearly holding court. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language was aggressive and angry. A few minutes later, someone rang my doorbell. I opened it to find a man in his 40s wearing an expensive-looking ski jacket and a scowl. "Are you Ethan Reeves?" "I am." "I'm Dale Morrison. I live over on Birchwood Lane. I need to get to my house and the path is blocked." "You need to clear it right now. The path crosses my private property and I'm not required to maintain it. You'll need to use the main road." "That's ridiculous. I've been using this path for 5 years. You can't just block it." "I'm not blocking anything. Nature is. And the path is on my property, which means I decide who uses it and when." Dale's face turned purple. "Listen here, you selfish piece of work. I've got 2 kids and a wife waiting at home, and I'm not walking an extra mile in a blizzard because you want to throw a tantrum about property lines. Then I suggest you start walking because I'm not giving you permission to cross my land." He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell coffee on his breath. "Maybe I don't need your permission. If you step onto my property without my consent, you're trespassing, and I'll call the police." "Your choice." We stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, he spat into the snow at the edge of my porch and walked away, joining the group that was still congregated near the property line. I watched them argue among themselves for a few more minutes before they dispersed, most of them trudging away toward Oakwood Drive. I called the Grand Traverse County Sheriff's Department non-emergency line and explained the situation to the dispatcher. She took down my information and said a deputy would swing by later to check on things. Deputy Karen Foster arrived around 7, just as the snow was finally starting to taper off. She was a woman in her early 30s with a no-nonsense demeanor that I immediately appreciated. "Mr. Reeves, I understand you're having some issues with your HOA." I invited her in and showed her the survey documents, explaining the history of the path and the HOA's demands. She listened carefully, taking notes. "So just to be clear, this path runs through your property, and there's no recorded easement that would give the HOA or residents the right to use it." "That's correct. My attorney confirmed it this afternoon. And the HOA is threatening you with fines and demanding that you maintain the path." "Yes. And about an hour ago, a resident named Dale Morrison came to my door and essentially threatened to use the path regardless of what I said." Deputy Foster nodded. "Okay. Here's the situation from a law enforcement perspective. You have every right to restrict access to your private property. If people cross your land without permission, that's criminal trespass. However, because there's been a long-standing pattern of use, some of the residents may genuinely believe they have the right to use the path. My recommendation is that you post clear no trespassing signs at both ends of the path. That way, anyone who uses it after the signs are up can't claim they didn't know they were trespassing. That makes sense. As for the HOA's threats, that's a civil matter. You'll need to work that out with your attorney. But if anyone harasses you, threatens you, or damages your property, that's criminal, and you should call us immediately. I'm going to make a note in our system about this situation so that other deputies are aware if we get calls from your address." "I appreciate that. One more thing. I've dealt with Brenda Patterson before. She was involved in a dispute with another resident last year over Christmas decorations. She tends to think HOA rules supersede actual law. Don't let her bully you. You're in the right here." After Deputy Foster left, I felt better about the situation. At least law enforcement was on my side. I spent the rest of the evening researching no trespassing signs and ordered a set of heavy-duty metal ones that would be delivered in 2 days. The next morning, I woke up to find that someone had shoveled the path through my property during the night. The entire length of it, probably 150 feet, had been cleared down to the grass. At both ends of the path, several sets of footprints led away in different directions. I was furious. Not only had someone trespassed on my property in the middle of the night, but they had done so deliberately after I had made my position clear. I took photographs from every angle, then called Marcus. "Someone shoveled the path last night without my permission. What do I do?" "Did you see who did it?" "No, but I'm guessing it was organized by the HOA. Document everything with photos and timestamps. I'm going to add this to the cease and desist letter I was planning to send today. This is actually good for us in a way because it proves they're knowingly trespassing." "It doesn't feel good. I know, but trust me. Every time they violate your property rights, our case gets stronger. Just sit tight and let me handle this." At 10 that morning, Brenda showed up at my door again, this time with Patricia Hendricks and another woman I didn't recognize. "Good morning, Ethan," Brenda said with a saccharine smile. "I see the path has been cleared. Some concerned citizens took it upon themselves to ensure neighborhood safety. I hope you appreciate their community spirit." "What I appreciate is that you just admitted to organizing a trespassing incident on my property." Her smile faltered. "Trespassing? Don't be ridiculous. We were providing a service. A service I didn't request and explicitly told you I didn't want. You had no right to send people onto my land." The woman I didn't recognize stepped forward. She was younger than the others, maybe in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Mr. Reeves, I'm Linda Hartwell, the HOA's legal advisor. I think there's been a significant misunderstanding here." The subdivision plat that was filed with Grand Traverse County clearly shows that path as a designated pedestrian right-of-way. Your survey may show that the land is technically within your deed boundaries, but the right-of-way supersedes your ownership rights. Then you should have no problem providing documentation of that right-of-way to my attorney. His name is Marcus Chen, and he'll be expecting your call. Linda's eyes narrowed. We don't need to provide anything. The burden of proof is on you to show that the right-of-way doesn't exist. That's not how property law works, and you know it. If you're claiming an easement or right-of-way, you need to prove it. Until then, stay off my land. Brenda's fake smile was completely gone now. You're making a huge mistake, Ethan. This community has standards, and we have ways of enforcing them. You're going to find yourself very isolated if you continue down this path. Is that another threat? It's a promise. I closed the door in their faces and immediately called Marcus to report the conversation. He was delighted. They brought their legal advisor to your house, and she made claims about a right-of-way without providing documentation. This is perfect. I'm going to request all their records immediately, and if they can't produce evidence of this alleged right-of-way, we're going to bury them. What about the threats Brenda keeps making? Document them. Record them if Michigan is a one-party consent state, which it is. The more evidence we have of harassment, the better. Over the next few days, the situation escalated in ways I hadn't anticipated. First, I received a formal letter from the HOA board informing me that I was being fined $5,000 for willful non-compliance with community maintenance standards and deliberate obstruction of community amenities. The letter was full of legal-sounding language, but provided no actual documentation of their authority to assess such fines. Second, I started receiving anonymous complaints. Someone called the county building inspector, claiming I had unpermitted construction on my property. The inspector showed up, looked around, found nothing wrong, and told me he was getting tired of false complaints from Lakeside Meadows. Someone else called the sheriff's department claiming I was running a business out of my home in violation of residential zoning. That deputy also found nothing wrong and apologized for the inconvenience. Third, and most disturbing, someone let the air out of all 4 of my truck tires one night. I had security cameras, but they had been mysteriously spray painted over earlier that same day, and I hadn't noticed until after the vandalism occurred. I filed a police report and upgraded my security system with Deputy Foster's recommendation to include motion-activated lights and cameras with night vision. The new cameras caught someone throwing eggs at my house 2 nights later. The footage was grainy, but it looked like a teenager, probably the kid of one of the HOA board members. Marcus filed a formal complaint with the Michigan Attorney General's office regarding the HOA's harassment and fraudulent fine assessments. He also sent a comprehensive demand letter to the HOA board, requesting all documentation related to the alleged right-of-way and informing them that continued trespassing would result in a lawsuit. The response from Linda Hartwell, the HOA's legal advisor, was illuminating. She provided a copy of the original subdivision plat from 2018, which did indeed show a pedestrian pathway marked through the area where my property was located. However, as Marcus immediately pointed out, the plat showed the pathway running along the property boundary line, not through the middle of my property where the actual path had been constructed. Someone had either made a mistake during the development's construction, or the path had been moved at some point and no one had bothered to update the paperwork. "This is huge," Marcus told me over the phone. "They've been using the wrong location for years." Even if there was a valid right-of-way, which is questionable, it's not where they've been walking. They have absolutely no legal leg to stand on. So what happens now? Now we go on a fence. I'm going to file a lawsuit against the HOA for trespassing, harassment, and defamation. We're also going to seek an injunction preventing them from accessing your property and requiring them to remove the path they created. Will that actually work, given the evidence we have? Absolutely. The question is whether they'll settle before it gets to court. Most HOAs don't want the publicity of losing a case this badly. The lawsuit was filed on March 15th. The HOA board's response was to hold an emergency meeting and vote to levy a special assessment of $500 against every homeowner in Lakeside Meadows to pay for their legal defense. According to the gossip I heard through my one friendly neighbor, an older woman named Susan Caldwell who lived on Maple Ridge Road, the announcement of the special assessment had caused an uproar at the meeting. Half the people there were furious, Susan told me when she stopped by with a basket of muffins. They wanted to know why they should pay for the board's legal fees over a fight that Brenda started. Someone made a motion to recall the entire board, but Brenda shut it down using some procedural rule. It was a mess. I'm sorry the other residents are getting dragged into this. Susan waved her hand dismissively. Don't be. Most people have been afraid of Brenda for years. She rules that board like her personal fiefdom. Maybe this will finally be the thing that gets her removed. Besides, you're in the right. I looked up the property records after all this started, and your survey is correct. That path is on your land, and Brenda has been lying about it for who knows how long. Did you use the path? Sure, when I first moved here. But I stopped after I twisted my ankle on it last winter. The HOA never maintained it properly despite claiming it was a community amenity. The thing was full of ice and cracks. If you ask me, it's a liability waiting to happen. That comment stuck with me. I asked Marcus about it during our next call. Has anyone ever been injured on that path before? Why do you ask? My neighbor mentioned twisting her ankle on it. If the HOA has been claiming the path is a community amenity and encouraging people to use it, but it's actually on private property, who's liable if someone gets hurt? There was a long pause. That's a very good question. If someone were injured and sued, the HOA would likely claim the landowner is responsible since it's on their property. But if the landowner never gave permission for the path, and the HOA created it without authorization, then the HOA would be liable. This could actually be a much bigger problem for them than just trespassing. Should we bring it up? I'll add it to our complaint. It shows that the HOA's actions created potential liability for you without your knowledge or consent. That's another strong argument in our favor. The amended complaint was filed a week later. The same day, I received a letter from an attorney named Robert Garrison, who introduced himself as the HOA's new legal counsel. Linda Hartwell, apparently, had been fired or had resigned after the board saw our evidence. Robert's letter was much more measured in tone than anything that had come before. Mr. Reeves, I have been retained by the Lakeside Meadows HOA to resolve the ongoing dispute regarding the pedestrian path that crosses your property. After reviewing the evidence, including the survey you commissioned and the original subdivision plat, I believe there may have been a good faith misunderstanding about the location and status of the path. I would like to propose a meeting between yourself, your attorney, and the HOA board to discuss a resolution that serves everyone's interests. Marcus and I agreed to the meeting, which was scheduled for April 2nd at the Lakeside Meadows Community Center. The blizzard was long past by then, and spring was starting to arrive in northern Michigan. The path through my property, which had been trampled and muddy from the few people who had continued to use it despite my no trespassing signs, was beginning to dry out. The meeting was tense from the start. Brenda, Patricia, Todd, and two other board members I hadn't met were seated on one side of a long table. Robert Garrison sat at the head of the table, with Marcus and me on the opposite side. Robert started with what I assumed was meant to be a conciliatory statement. "Thank you all for coming. I think we can all agree that this situation has gotten out of hand, and that a resolution is in everyone's best interest. Mr. Reeves, the board wants to acknowledge that there appears to have been an error in the original placement of the pedestrian path. However, the path has been in use for over 6 years, and many residents have come to rely on it. The board would like to propose a compromise." "I'm listening," I said. "The HOA would like to purchase a formal easement from you for the existing path. In exchange, the HOA would assume all maintenance responsibilities and liability for the path, and would compensate you for the use of your land. We're prepared to offer $10,000 for a perpetual easement." I looked at Marcus, who gave me a slight nod indicating I should let him respond. "Mr. Garrison, while we appreciate the board's willingness to negotiate, $10,000 for a perpetual easement is insultingly low. The path in question is approximately 150 feet long and 15 feet wide, which amounts to roughly 2,250 square feet of land. In this area, land is valued at approximately $12 per square foot, which means the fair market value of that parcel is close to $27,000. Additionally, my client has suffered harassment, vandalism, and defamation as a result of the HOA's actions. Any settlement would need to address those damages as well." Brenda's face turned red. $27,000 for a stupid path, that's extortion." Robert held up a hand. "Mrs. Patterson, please let me handle this." He turned back to Marcus. "Your valuation seems high for what is essentially a walkway with no development potential. It's my client's property, and he has no obligation to sell any portion of it. If the HOA wants an easement, they need to pay fair market value. As for the harassment and other damages, we have extensive documentation including police reports, security camera footage, and records of frivolous complaints filed against my client. We're prepared to seek additional damages if necessary." Robert made some notes on his legal pad. "I'll need to consult with my clients. Can we take a brief recess?" Marcus and I stepped outside while the HOA board huddled with Robert. It was a beautiful spring day, and I couldn't help but think about how much simpler my life would be if I had just bought a house in the middle of nowhere instead of on the edge of this neighborhood. "You think they'll agree to the settlement?" I asked Marcus. "Depends on how realistic they are about their legal position. If they go to court, they'll lose, and it'll cost them a lot more than $27,000 in legal fees. But people like Brenda Patterson don't always think rationally." We were called back in after about 20 minutes. Brenda looked furious, but Robert had his poker face on. "Mr. Reeves, the board is willing to offer $20,000 for the easement, plus an additional $5,000 to resolve all other claims. That's our final offer." I looked at Marcus again. He scribbled something on his notepad and showed it to me. "Take it unless you want to drag this out for months." I thought about it for a moment. $25,000 wasn't the full amount we had asked for, but it was close. More importantly, it would end this nightmare and let me get back to living my life in peace. "I have one condition," I said. "The settlement agreement needs to include a clause stating that the HOA admits it had no legal right to use my property prior to this easement, and that all previous fines and demands are void and unenforceable. I also want a written apology from the board for the harassment I've experienced." Brenda started to object, but Robert cut her off. "That's reasonable. I'll draft an agreement with those terms. One more thing, I added. The easement is for pedestrian use only. No vehicles, no maintenance equipment other than what's necessary to keep the path safe, and the HOA is fully liable for any injuries or accidents that occur on the path. Agreed. We shook hands, and Robert said he would have the settlement agreement ready for review within a week. As we were leaving, Brenda cornered me in the parking lot. "I hope you're happy," she hissed. "You've cost this community $25,000 and caused months of disruption, all because you're too selfish to be a good neighbor." "Brenda, I'm not the one who threatened fines and harassment over a property dispute. I'm not the one who organized trespassing or encouraged vandalism. You created this entire situation by refusing to acknowledge basic property rights. If you had approached me respectfully from the beginning and asked to discuss an easement, we could have worked something out without lawyers or lawsuits. You're still a selfish jerk. And you're still president of an HOA that just learned it doesn't have unlimited power. I guess we both have to live with reality." I walked away, leaving her fuming in the parking lot. The settlement agreement was finalized on April 12th. The HOA paid me $25,000, officially recorded the easement with Grand Traverse County, and issued a written apology that was distributed to all residents of Lakeside Meadows. The apology was brief and grudging, but it acknowledged that the board had been in error and that I had been within my rights to defend my property. I used part of the settlement money to upgrade my property with better fencing and landscaping, creating a clear visual boundary between my private yard and the easement area. I also invested in a comprehensive security system that covered all angles of my property, because I wasn't naive enough to think that Brenda had completely given up her grudge. The path was repaved by the HOA in early May, and they installed proper lighting and signage marking it as a community easement. To their credit, they did maintain it properly going forward, and I never had any issues with the maintenance equipment or usage. But the story didn't end there. In late May, I received a call from Susan Caldwell, my friendly neighbor who had brought me muffins during the dispute. "Ethan, you need to hear this. There's going to be a special election to recall the entire HOA board." Someone did a deep dive into the HOA's finances and found some very questionable expenses. Brenda has been using the HOA credit card for personal purchases, and there's about $40,000 missing from the reserve fund. You're kidding. I wish I was. The audit was requested by a group of residents who were angry about the special assessment. Once they started looking into things, they found all sorts of problems. Brenda apparently thought she could do whatever she wanted because no one ever questioned her. What happens now? The state attorney general's office is investigating. There might be criminal charges. Either way, Brenda's done as HOA president. The recall vote is next week, and it's going to be unanimous. True to Susan's word, the recall election was held on June 1st, and all 5 board members were removed by a vote of 73-2. The only votes against the recall were from Brenda and her husband Todd. A new board was elected, headed by a retired accountant named Gregory Walsh, who immediately hired a forensic accountant to review all of the HOA's financial records. The forensic audit revealed that Brenda had embezzled approximately $58,000 over a 3-year period. The money had been used for personal vacations, shopping sprees, and renovations to her house. She had disguised the expenses as community improvement projects and administrative costs, but the paper trail was clear once someone actually looked. On July 15th, Brenda Patterson was arrested and charged with embezzlement and fraud. The charges were serious enough that she was looking at potential prison time. The new HOA board filed a civil lawsuit to recover the stolen funds, placing a lien on Brenda and Todd's house. I watched the news coverage of her arrest with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because justice was being served, but sadness because so much conflict and pain could have been avoided if Brenda had just been honest and respectful from the beginning. The path dispute had been the catalyst that led to her downfall, but the real problem had been her attitude that she was above the rules and could treat people however she wanted. Todd Patterson, who apparently had no knowledge of his wife's embezzlement, filed for divorce in August. The house was sold to pay back the HOA, and both of them moved away from Traverse City. I heard through the grapevine that Todd relocated to Florida to live with his sister, while Brenda eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges and served 18 months in a minimum security facility. The new HOA board reached out to me in September to apologize for everything that had happened and to thank me for standing up for my property rights. Gregory Walsh personally came to my house with a gift basket and an invitation to join the board, which I politely declined. I had no interest in HOA politics, but I appreciated the gesture. Life in Lakeside Meadows gradually returned to normal. The path across my property continued to be used by residents, but now it was properly maintained and clearly marked as an easement. No one hassled me about maintenance or tried to fine me for imaginary violations. The new board operated transparently, with regular financial reports and open meetings where residents could voice concerns without being shouted down. I became friendly with several of my neighbors who had been secretly relieved to see Brenda removed from power. Many of them shared stories of her bullying and abuse of authority over the years. One couple had been fined repeatedly for having the wrong shade of mailbox. Another family had been threatened with legal action because their children's basketball hoop was 6 inches over the height limit specified in the HOA bylaws. The stories went on, painting a picture of a petty tyrant who had made many people's lives miserable. By the time fall arrived, I felt like I had finally found the peace and privacy I had been looking for when I bought the property. The leaves turned brilliant shades of orange and red, and I spent my weekends hiking the nearby trails and working on home improvement projects. The path dispute, which had consumed so much of my energy and attention, became just another story to tell, albeit a dramatic one. I learned several important lessons from the experience. First, property rights matter, and it's worth defending them even when it's inconvenient or unpopular. Second, bullies like Brenda Patterson rely on people being too intimidated or too tired to stand up to them. Once someone finally does, their house of cards tends to collapse quickly. Third, documentation is everything. The survey I had commissioned, the photos I had taken, the police reports I had filed, all of it had been crucial in proving my case. But perhaps the most important lesson was about community. A real community isn't built on threats and fines and rigid enforcement of arbitrary rules. It's built on mutual respect, honest communication, and a willingness to work together to solve problems. The old HOA board under Brenda's leadership had forgotten that, and it had poisoned the atmosphere of the entire neighborhood. The new board understood it, and the difference was remarkable. In November, I was invited to the Lakeside Meadows annual Thanksgiving potluck. I almost didn't go, worried that people would still resent me for the path dispute and the special assessment it had caused. But Susan Caldwell convinced me to attend, promising that I would be pleasantly surprised. She was right. When I arrived at the community center with a homemade pumpkin pie, I was greeted warmly by dozens of neighbors, many of whom thanked me for exposing Brenda's corruption. Several people told me afraid to speak up before, but my willingness to fight back had inspired them to demand better leadership. Dale Morrison, the man who had confronted me on my porch during the blizzard, approached me with an embarrassed expression. "Ethan, I owe you an apology. I was completely out of line that night. Brenda had been telling everyone that you were just being difficult and that you didn't have any legitimate claim to the property. I believed her and I took it out on you. I'm sorry." I shook his hand. Apology accepted. I know emotions were running high. Still, I shouldn't have gotten in your face like that. For what it's worth, I'm glad you stood your ground. If you hadn't, we never would have found out what Brenda was up to. The potluck was a genuinely enjoyable evening. I met people I had only waved to in passing, shared stories, and felt for the first time like I was actually part of the community rather than just someone who lived nearby. It was a good feeling. As winter approached again, I found myself preparing for the snow with much less anxiety than the previous year. The path across my property was now the HOA's responsibility, and I had no obligation to maintain it. When the first major snowstorm hit in December, I watched from my warm kitchen as an HOA-hired plow cleared the path early in the morning, and I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. I had stood up for my rights, endured harassment and threats, and ultimately prevailed. More importantly, my actions had led to positive change for the entire community. Brenda Patterson's reign of terror was over. The HOA was operating honestly and transparently, and the neighborhood was a better place because of it. On Christmas Eve, I received a card in the mail from the new HOA board. Inside was a handwritten note from Gregory Walsh. "Dear Ethan, on behalf of the Lakeside Meadows community, we want to thank you for your courage and integrity during a difficult time. Your willingness to stand up for what was right, even when it was unpopular, made all of us examine our own behavior and demand better from our leadership. We're grateful to have you as a neighbor and a member of our community. Wishing you a joyful holiday season and a peaceful new year. Sincerely, Gregory Walsh and the Lakeside Meadows HOA Board." I propped the card up on my mantelpiece, next to the stockings I had hung for the holiday. Looking out at the snow-covered landscape, with the path cutting through my property now properly marked and maintained, I reflected on how much had changed in just 10 months. When Brenda Patterson had shown up at my door during that March blizzard, demanding that I shovel her sidewalk, she had no idea what chain of events she was setting in motion. Her arrogance and refusal to acknowledge basic property law had ultimately cost her everything: her position, her reputation, her freedom, and her home. All because she couldn't accept that someone else had rights too. Meanwhile, I had gained something valuable. Not just the settlement money or the formal easement agreement, but a sense of confidence and belonging. I had learned that standing up for yourself, even when it's hard, even when people hate you for it, is worth it. And I had learned that communities can heal and change when people refuse to accept toxic leadership. As I settled in for a quiet Christmas alone with my cat, a tabby named Winston who had been my companion through all the drama, I felt genuinely content for the first time since moving to Traverse City. The house was exactly what I wanted: spacious, private, full of character and potential. The neighborhood, now freed from Brenda's corruption and bullying, was becoming the kind of place I could see myself staying for many years. I raised a glass of wine in a silent toast to property rights, honest leadership, and the importance of never backing down when you know you're in the right. It had been a difficult year, but it had been worth it. The path across my property would remain, preserved by the easement agreement, but it was on my terms now with proper compensation and legal protection, and that made all the difference.